Hi, it's Uncle Larry with another movie review, but this time it's a movie which usually belongs in a certain niche category, except for the fact that it broke out and became a mainstream box office hit in 2023. The film is called Jesus Revolution, and its most recognizable star is Kelsey Grammer of Frasier fame, who says it's the most special piece of acting he's ever done. It's easy to recommend the movie for viewers with a devout connection to Christianity, especially for those who were in their youth at the time, because you're going to remember this period. For those without religious ties, Jesus Revolution might not be your cup of tea, unless, of course, you're curious about what this period was about. It's no exaggeration to call the Jesus movement the greatest spiritual awakening in history. So, before I comment further on the film itself, what was this Jesus movement? According to writers John and Elizabeth Sherrill, the Jesus movement was an evangelical Christian counterculture movement that began on the west coast of the United States in the late 60s and early 70s and spread widely throughout North America, Europe, Central America, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries before it subsided in the 1980s. Members of the movement were young people called Jesus people or Jesus freaks who were reacting to the hippie movement. It was a kind of backlash to the drug-fueled tune-in, turn-on, drop-out ethos of the time. These young people looked like hippies. They adopted many of their practices, like living in communes, but found their high of choice in Jesus. In addition to reacting against the excesses of their hedonistic hippie peers, the Jesus people were also calling out the hypocrisy of the static, formal, lifeless Christian churches and denominations of the time. In practice, many members of the Jesus people testified to having supernatural experiences similar to those recorded in the Acts of the Apostles in the New Testament, especially speaking with tongues, claims of miracles, including divine healing. This emphasis on supernatural experiences was calling the church back to a more biblical picture of Christianity, in their view, in which, quote, gifts of the Holy Spirit, unquote, would be restored to the church. People forget how enormous this movement became. I'll put some photos from the big publications of the day, like Time Magazine and Life Magazine, in the comments so you can see this for context if you're not familiar with this period. The Jesus movement left a legacy, and as with most movements, religious or not, it eventually formed institutions of its own. I suppose you could say the Jesus movement eventually got absorbed into mainstream evangelical culture and became the Jesus industry. It included the formation of various new Christian denominations. Give you an example, Winnipeg's Vineyard Church downtown is a direct descendant of the Jesus movement, as well as other Christian organizations that emerged after the movement. It laid the foundations for the evangelical megachurches, which exist in every city, including our own. It laid the foundation for several ongoing Christian cultural movements, including Jesus music, which started out as acoustic hippie folk songs with Christian lyrics that evolved into what is now called contemporary Christian music, or CCM, and Christian rock. Both of those a worldwide multi-billion-dollar music industry. Then there's the development of Christian media in publishing and film, producing bestsellers and box office hits of their own, like the film that I will be commenting on today. And you could argue the large evangelical presence on social media also owes part of its legacy to the Jesus movement. Now, let's look at the movie itself. I'm borrowing from Sean Means on Rotten Tomatoes, as well as my own observations for the next couple of paragraphs. The story starts with Pastor Chuck Smith, played by Kelsey Grammer, a Baptist minister in a sleepy, half-empty church in Costa Mesa, California. His rebel daughter, Jeanette, on a dare, brings home a hippie, a charismatic street preacher, Lonnie Frisbee. Pastor Chuck is dubious of Lonnie at first, but soon recognizes that Lonnie's interest in Jesus is genuine and could bring in a new generation of parishioners to his ailing church. The early going is rough, particularly when Pastor Chuck's older church members threaten Pastor Chuck with his job for embracing the ever-growing ranks of young, barefoot, long-haired worshipers. In one of the nicest scenes in the movie, Chuck, Kelsey Grammer's character, responds to the complaints about the grime being tracked into the church by these dirty hippies by doing the most Christ-like thing he can think of, and that is to wash the young people's feet as they enter the building. Threading through the rise of Pastor Chuck's Calvary Chapel Church and Lonnie's prominence as a charismatic preacher and faith healer comes our third player. That's Greg Laurie, a teen who drops out of military school and follows his bliss and a cute girl through the hippie community, but he finds the drug scene and the hedonism a dead end. He then has an encounter with Lonnie, who converts, and then he converts to Christianity and eventually becomes a leader of the movement as well. So there's three big players, Chuck, Lonnie, and Greg. Calvary Chapel explodes out of its building. It ends up holding services in a tent that seats thousands, and then it builds a great big megachurch. There are mass baptisms of thousands of young people at nearby Pirates Cove. It's a riveting story told through the eyes of Greg Laurie. Now, I don't want to give away the rest of the plot, but that sets the scene, so I'll stop there. How about some observations? Okay. First, one issue with the movie is that it gives the impression that the Jesus movement started at Calvary Chapel with Chuck and Lonnie, when in truth it emerged alongside other so-called awakenings and was widespread by the early 70s. It's a mystery to me how spontaneous movements, religious or otherwise, emerge and evolve in different places at the same time. You're going to have to ask a sociologist about that one. I can't get it. The Chuck, Lonnie, and Greg saga is one of the main catalysts, you could say, of the movement, but it's not the sole source. Second, while it tries to paint the characters as flawed human beings, it does gloss over some pretty glaring aspects of Lonnie Frisbee's lifestyle in particular, which was at odds with his beliefs. Nevertheless, Lonnie was a huge figure whose life is chronicled in the documentary Lonnie Frisbee, The Life and Death of a Hippie Preacher, a documentary by David DeSabatino, who is here on Facebook. Third, the movie tries its best to avoid being preachy, which is almost unavoidable as a tendency in films produced by evangelical Christian filmmakers. That's why so many of their movies end up feeling amateurish, cliched, sentimental, and frankly kind of corny. Jesus Revolution avoids falling into this proselytizing trap, but just barely. Overall, the production values are first-rate. Its box office success does not surprise me. It continues to rake in millions on streaming platforms. So do I recommend it? Well, if you come from a Christian background, certainly. If you don't, but you're curious about the origins of a religious youth movement that literally swept the world 50 years ago, Jesus Revolution might help satisfy that curiosity.